Hello and welcome to Blockchain Gaming World episode 158. I'm your host, John Jordan. Don't forget to check out my daily email about what's happening in the world of blockchain gaming. You can find that at gamestx.substack.com. In this episode, I'm talking to Sicco Nats, who is the head of ecosystem at Moonbeam. So I haven't done a lot of podcasts up to this point with infrastructure companies, looking to do a few more. So if you're interested, if you're an infrastructure company, want to get on the podcast, let me know, please. In the case of Moonbeam, it's sort of starting its journey into gaming, which is one of the reasons I was talking to Sicco. And it has a sort of few interesting games that are signed up already, but it's not a massive gaming platform yet, unlike some other sort of Ethereum L2s and L3s that we're seeing. Should point out actually that Moonbeam is not a Ethereum L2. It is actually based on the Polkadot ecosystem. It is actually its own L1 blockchain. But one of the interesting things is one of the interesting sort of concepts that they are using is the way that up to this point, pretty much everyone has had their sort of smart contract logic and their assets, their NFTs and their tokens on the same chain. But this is probably something that is going to change. And Moonbeam is one of the sort of concepts that they have is that you would have your assets on one chain, and then in this case, you would run your smart contract logic on the Moonbeam chain itself. So that's one of the things we're sort of talking about. We talk obviously about a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Hope you enjoy the episode. Don't forget to subscribe. We are pumping these out every week. Got some good ones coming up in future as well. But I hope you enjoy it, and see you soon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining. And big thanks to Sicco, who is joining us from Moonbeam, where he is head of ecosystem. How's it going, Sicco?
Pretty good. Thank you for having me, John.
No, good. So often, mainly on the podcast, I talk to people who are making games. Haven't done a lot of infrastructure in the past. I have done stepped into a little bit here and there. So one key reason of talking to you today is Moonbeam is looking, I guess, like a lot of chains, a lot of tech to do some more gaming stuff in 2024. So that's good to hear. We'll talk about that. But and also Moonbeam, I think, from my point of view, is technically sounds like it's doing some pretty interesting things from a blockchain point of view, which I will not pretend I understand technically from a viewpoint, but that's sort of why you're here to give us that information. But always good to get some background on the interviewee. So if you could give us a bit of a potted history, you've been around in various sort of tech blockchain spaces for a while, I think. So if you can unpick that journey to
sure. I can give you a quick 5-minute overview on who I am. So I'm Sicco Nats. I'm originally from Belgium, from Antwerp, but I moved to Canada 21 years ago.
Okay.
And I'm based there right now, so I'm just outside Ottawa. Most of my career has been in technology. So originally started as a backend developer on the sort of Java enterprise systems. Used to work for a very large multinational, kind of working on their website and content management system. And then I've also spent 12-13 years sort of in engineering management, basically, used to be VP of engineering at a American startup. So I've managed sort of like large distributed diverse teams of engineers, kind of microservices architecture, that kind of stuff. I transitioned to Web3 in sort of at the end of 2021, so a little bit late, I guess, compared to some people have been here a lot longer than me, but was pretty interested in the space, primarily sort of from I think my original interest was kind of around decentralized governance. One of the things is when you work at companies, the larger the company, the more kind of bureaucracy and the more bloat and the more management, i.e. people like me, and you do start to see sort of some of the inefficiencies. And I was sort of very fascinated by, if you think about it, the way that companies are built or the way that they run, it essentially hasn't changed fundamentally all that much in the last 100 years. And I was sort of very interested in here's like people in the Web3 space trying at least a different way of doing it, right? Being able to sort of deliver software solutions without necessarily having sort of these like complicated corporate structures. So found that pretty appealing, and so here I am basically.
And I think in your bio as well, you I don't know if you would self-define as a gamer, but your gaming has sort of been something sort of alongside the career that you sort of.
I'm definitely a gamer. I started 40 years ago when I was 8 years old on a Commodore 64, and I have pretty much I've been a PC gamer for 40 years. I do also have, I used to have an Xbox. I have various PlayStation. I think I have 3 PlayStation 5s around the house, kicking around
Okay.
kids as well. And
Yeah.
then also, I don't know if you can tell, but the stack of books behind me, part of my role-playing game collection. So I have a lot more in the basement. But yeah, I've been playing pen and paper role-playing games since I was 13 years old. So not just Dungeons and Dragons, but Lore Master, MERP, Call of Cthulhu, Shadowrun, Ars Magica, like a whole bunch. And then also, I was a very, very early stage Magic the Gathering player. I had a friend who had connections with Wizard of the Coast, so I was like, one of the first people to play it, basically. So yeah, so I'm a nerd, basically. So.
Okay. Just not necessarily about Moonbeam, but how are you finding the sort of for someone who's in sort of Web3, not specifically focusing on gaming, but is that something you sort of pay a lot of attention to, or are you just sort of too busy just doing all the sort of
No. I mean, I think it has been like a bigger focus for me over the last year. I think we're trying to sort of understand where at Moonbeam, I'm head of ecosystem development, so a big part of my role is to help try grow the ecosystem and a variety of different ways that we do that via grants and tech support and marketing. But we're trying to sort of understand where the market trends are headed, and I do think there is a huge future for Web3 gaming, or at least some Web3 aspects added to gaming. And so I've been heavily involved in over the last years in talking to studios, trying to get games to come to deploy to Moonbeam, deploying game infrastructure projects and that kind of thing. So and so it's been kind of nice being able to kind of marry my hobby to my profession, which I was never able to do before. So that's been kind of interesting. So
cool. Good. Okay, so finding out a little bit about you and what you're up to, let's sort of dive into Moonbeam. So how would you describe Moonbeam? I guess it's one of these things where you look at the website and you see all these descriptions. You're like, oh, what does that actually?
Right. So at the very basis, I mean, I don't know how Web3 technical your audience is, but I'd say at the very basis, I mean, Moonbeam is we're a layer 1 blockchain, right? So we're similar to, in that sense, to Ethereum or Polygon or Binance. And crucially, we are EVM compatible. So I mean, I'll start with the basics. So we're EVM compatible. So basically, if you have developed in Web3 application or a series of smart contracts for Ethereum, you can basically just wholesale port them over to Moonbeam and they'll just work. And we also not only will they work, but we have all support for all of the same developer tooling. So Hardhat, Truffle, I mean, all the same tooling will work. All of the same kind of infrastructure pieces that developers are usually expect to see. So we have Chainlink for oracles. We have kind of a branded version of Etherscan, a white label version of Etherscan called Moonscan, but it is basically fundamentally it's Etherscan. So block explorers, all this kind of stuff. And so at the core, the reason at the core, the reason we went for Ethereum compatibility is because it is just become sort of the de facto standard for Web3 development. So by doing that, you just get access to the largest pool of Web3 developers, right? And so we deliver that capability as a Polkadot parachain. So you then also start getting the benefits of Polkadot, which are things like forkless upgrades, on-chain governance, intra-parachain communication via XM, which is the secure communication channel. So you sort of get like a little bit of a mix of both worlds, right? So or mix of best of both worlds. The specific angle that we've then added on top of that is what we call connected contracts. So the basic idea here is that if you believe that the future is multi-chain, that not one single chain will dominate all of Web3, then interoperability becomes like a pretty important aspect, right? So, and the way that I usually think about that is, if you're a developer and you're building a game or a DeFi protocol or an NFT marketplace or like anything really, you'll start on one specific chain because you like that chain, because you like the community or like the technology. You start building there, but at some point you will have saturated that market, right? You'll have captured everybody that wants to play your game. Well, hopefully, right? If you're successful, you'll have captured everybody who wants to play your game on that chain or everybody who wants to use your DeFi protocol. So when teams get to that stage in their development, the logical step for them is to start looking at other chains. And typically today, or at least what a lot of teams do, is they just basically take their code base, they fork it, and then port it over to another chain. And because that's sort of a low resistance path. The
Mm.
problem that does create like a bunch of problems. So like,
Mm.
one, not all chains are the same. They may not support the same features. So some aspects of your game or your DeFi ecosystem, whatever, that worked on the original chain, they may not work on the new chain, right? You also just increase complexity for the developer team. So then I have to manage these sort of two distinct code bases, and it's really bad from an end user experience, because I can't now connect a single wallet. So if I have a game on chain A and a game on chain B, and I have assets in both, well, I need like a distinct wallet for each one. And if you're on chain A and I'm on chain B, we can't play together. And so a big part of our focus has been this, what we call this connected contract strategy, which is kind of a different solution to this problem, where the idea being that you would deploy most of your core logic for your gaming or application on one central chain, i.e. Moonbeam, obviously, right?
Yep.
And then, via a variety of communication protocols, there are on these other chains that you want to interact with, there are these kind of like proxies, but they're very simple. They're just doing atomic operations. And the home chain, or the core chain, the central hub essentially, has visibility and knowledge of what happens on all these other chains. So now you don't have all this complexity to manage. And specifically for your end users, it kind of creates like more like a seamless experience. They don't necessarily have to worry about which chain that their application's on and so forth. And so, we think that it's just a much better way to for people to kind of work in a seamless way across multiple chains, basically. So that, I know that's a little technical, but that's essentially kind of the core of the idea. So
even I could follow it. So obviously, clearly wasn't too technical. I'm sure you could go into a lot more detail.
Great.
But just to unpick a few things there. So Moonbeam is a layer one. It is its own sort of standalone thing, but it is part of the Polkadot ecosystem. So it's sort of using the, I don't know, would it be the Polkadot SDK or something as it's sort of back end. So fundamentally, out of the box, it talks and deals with all the other Polkadot chains,
right?
Because they're all native, aren't they? So it's interesting. I mean, in general, we had John Linden from Mythical Games, and obviously they're building the Mythos chain on Polkadot as well. And that's really, we've not really seen up to this point a lot of gaming stuff happening on Polkadot. So I guess when I got into the space, there was like Polkadot and Cosmos were these are the interoperable chains, and it just generally seems to have taken much longer for people to get their head around. I don't know if it's technically how these things work, or how they've been. They weren't built out enough, or they're just not. I don't know. They're not sort of playing into the narrative, which is all sort of L2s now.
Yep.
Well, I mean, in general, why do you think something like Polkadot sort of has taken longer to sort of gain?
I mean, I think Polkadot's just newer, so I think that's part of it. And I think,
but it's pretty old. It's not like super news. It's not like some of these chains that just sort of arrived like last year or something. It's not like Arbitron.
No, that's fair. But no, I think that's fair. I mean, Polkadot as a whole has existed for, I think, Polkadot's been sort of built out over like a period of 5 or 6 years. But if you think about it, the very first parachains like launched 2 years ago, which is in the great, like, I mean, Moonbeam was like one of the first one that launched, right? So, and we launched January 1st or January 11th, 2022. So it's about 2 years ago. Whereas like, if you look at like, say, like a Polygon or a Binance, like they've been around for 5 or 6 years. So I think that's part of it. I think, I don't think it has been, I don't think it was like sort of like an immediate bid focus for like just the Polkadot ecosystem as a whole. I think it was kind of more geared towards like, sort of DeFi and NFTs. And I think, I think in that sense, like the ecosystem is maybe a little bit late to the table from a narrative perspective. But I think, part of the thing too is like, when we started looking at gaming, part of the discussion was sort of like, I think chains is still sort of trying to figure out, okay, what does it mean to focus on gaming, right? So everybody at first initially goes like, well, it's about block times, right? You need to have like super fast block times. But I actually think the thinking has kind of shifted a bit there. So if you think back 2-3 years ago when GameFi really sort of took off with Axie Infinity, everybody was sort of building these like fully on-chain games. And I think a lot of studios have now kind of walked back from that, basically, realizing that that's very complicated to do. It's smart contract developers are frankly also fairly expensive. So I think it is sort of cheaper to use game developers and then sort of sprinkle some Web3 than like basically build like a fully Web3 game, right? I think the other thing is like, the block time thing is like a little bit of a red herring, because like if you look at some of the chains with like the absolute fastest block times, for example, Arbitrum, right? They have sub-second block times. Yeah, okay, that's fast in Web3 land. It's horribly slow in gaming land, right? If I'm shooting somebody or I'm singing a sword or putting a cart down, if every time there's like a 1 second delay, like, I mean, I'm on a gaming monitor and I've got 5 millisecond like delay, right? So I think people have kind of realized that, the better way to do this is to kind of, use blockchain for what it's good for, which is ownerships and transfers of assets, and kind of use traditional gaming technology for like much of the direct gaming interaction. And so I think once people kind of understood that, it was like, well, actually, okay, so once you kind of remove this block time thing, then it turns out that a lot more of it is about like interoperability, it's about compatibility, it's about software support. All the gaming studios are really looking for gaming SDKs that make it easier for them to sort of integrate the blockchain stack into all their other stacks. And suddenly you realize, like, well, actually, no, you know what? Like, we're actually perfectly positioned to do this. And then on top of that, we do bring these benefits of like fork as upgrades, right? If you're building a game, you don't want your game to go unavailable because the community has decided that they need to completely fork all the code, and now all these servers are being sort of switched over, basically. You know what I mean? So I think but I think now, like, I think there is sort of like some significant momentum. I think we've been on the Moonbeam side, we've been pushing sort of the game narrative for about a year, and we are starting to get some serious traction. I think we just announced this partnership with Animo, which is a game that's going to launch on PlayStation and Nintendo and Steam and on Epic. We have some existing homegrown games. We're kind of working on some other partnerships, and and like we're having more and more sort of teams kind of approach us and saying, hey, we see that you guys are interested in gaming. We see a lot of the SDKs and functionality that we need is there, and we're kind of interested with working with you guys. And I think that's true across the Polkadot ecosystem as well. So
I think when you were talking a bit about before, sort of the narrative around Polkadot, and I just kind of think that's the sort of the. I mean, obviously not being technical, so can't judge it from that point of view. But it's just been a. It's just not been sort of part of the conversation where the conversation has sort of moved from a few, people running on Ethereum mainnet, and then everyone moving to Polygon, and then people going to Solana, and then whatever, now we're on to sort of L2s. And that's sort of, when you talk to people about what chain you're on, or are you moving chains, that's sort of the narrative that they're on at the moment. They sort of know the half a dozen cases that they would probably be on because they know other games on there. And if you're just a chain without many games on it, then you're sort of not part of the conversation. But I don't think, say, Polkadot is very sort of quiet. But I think it's interesting. As soon as you said, I think it's a big thing on one of the websites, running Solidity on Polkadot, which is effectively one of the features that you're offering, then it's sort of like, well, everyone wants to be EVM. That's clearly the market has stayed and probably become more concentrated around EVM in the last 2 years, I would say. Probably a bit biased. But if you can run your EVM type stuff on a blockchain like Polkadot, which has all these other features as well. Some of maybe other obviously every chain has its own sort of features, but Polkadot seems to offer a very sort of interesting sort of superset of those features, and that seems to be something people should at least be considering more than they have at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the other part is about like support, right? Like, so I mean, we talked to a lot of. So I mean, look, I mean, I generally don't like casting shade at other L1s. So I'm going to try and avoid kind of naming specific chains as an example. But I think initially I think there was sort of a momentum along a lot of games to go to chains where there was a lot of other games, right?
Yeah.
And essentially then the underlying logic was like to try and sort of get some sort of cross pollination going, right? If these 3 games are already on like this specific chain, like, well, that if I launch my 4th game, I may also start to capture some of those games. We're actually seeing a lot of the inbound that we're now getting from teams that are kind of interested in deploying the Moonbeam. They're coming from those like larger chains, and they're saying, well, turns out that's actually not really panning out because a lot of those chains have attracted so many games they can't support them realistically. Like we try and ask for support with marketing, and like there's just like nobody picks up the phone. We're trying to get help with like technical implementation, and there's just nobody answering, and so we've tried to really kind of make it kind of like a sort of a 4-pillar approach, I would say. One is obviously yes, we do offer financial support via grants, but we put a lot of stress on like co-marketing. So like like these games that are deploying, we're having bi-weekly calls with them and kind of figuring out how to like align around marketing and kind of just help make noise about them and help elevate their profile so they get players. We give them DevRel support, so when they do run into technical issues, there's people on our side that can kind of help with that. And then a lot of it is like, yes, cross pollination, right? We're actually going out and saying, hey, we're like introducing gaming studios to one another, or like introducing to other infrastructure teams, and generally, so we have like a little bit more, I would say, like a high touch or velvet glove approach, but I would say that that we've had very positive reactions to that from the studios we're working with. Like they appreciate that, they kind of see us, they feel like they have more of a partnership here. So.
Yeah.
So
and as you sort of said very early on, it definitely, again, another trend which I think has obviously started, but is going to accelerate, is because people have been moving around sort of from chain to chain, or the last year and this year are going to be projects sort of really deciding what chain they're going to go on, no matter what they've said, like last year, or no matter where they've minted their NFTs. At some point, they're going to go live this year, and they have to sort of decide what they're on. But equally, even now, it's not. There are some obvious candidates, but there's no obvious winners. And as you say, a lot of people actually do want to have a multi-chain sort of approach. So they do want to go, well, we'll launch on this chain, but why would we not launch on these other ones as well? So I guess if you're providing a sort of you're sort of future proofing them, because you're basically in this case, I'm doing your sales pitch for you. But if you go, well, do it on Moonbeam, and then you can just sort of go wherever you want after that. So you sort of have this sort of foundation, and then it doesn't really matter where else you go. You're not limited.
That is the pitch, basically, right? They're like saying, like, well, look, why make this very difficult and agonizing decision? I mean, this is always the problem, right? I've been in technology for 25 years. There's always this thing where, like, you're like, well, like, is it MySQL or is it Postgres? Is it like going to be AWS or Azure? So, like, you always end up with these, like, sort of sometimes somewhat agonizing choices, and nobody has a crystal ball, and so. If you get it wrong, well, then like later on you have like a re-architecture project or a migration project, and that can set you back a lot of money, but also it's opportunity cost, right? That's if you're migrating from hey, ended up betting on the wrong horse, now I'm migrating to the right horse, well, like that's opportunity cost, because that's development cycles I'm not spending on building out my core feature set. So the argument with Moonbeam is, why make that bet? Like, why not sort of deploy to a chain where like you have maximum interoperability from a tooling and infrastructure point of view, and then also like we've put a lot of effort into like sort of providing sort of messaging protocols and bridging and so forth, and to have the widest range of support possible, basically. So so I think you should join our sales team. That's I think you did the pitch. I think you did the pitch really well. So yeah.
Although now I'm gonna to put my contrary hat on. So
for sure.
So one of the things I mentioned right early on, which I want you to explain to me a little bit, because so you've basically, one of the reasons that you can do this on Moonbeam is you're basically having this situation where sort of assets and functionality are not running on the same blockchain necessarily where the smart contracts are. So generally at the moment, for simplicity, everything have everything, all your tokens, all your NFTs, all your smart contracts on one chain. It all works because obviously it's all on the same chain, assuming you code it right. As soon as you start having this proper sort of multi-chain approach where there's assets on, you might have NFTs on two different blockchains and stuff, obviously your main smart contracts, I assume, on Moonbeam, and they sort of talk to each other somehow magically. So immediately to me, I go, well, that's not magic. Nothing's magic. So you've added complexity there in terms of these things trying to talk to each other, which is sort of what Polkadot is fundamentally designed to solve, I suppose. But obviously there's security issues as well. It's not necessarily in this case, I don't know, but obviously a lot of the big hacks have been around bridges, which is how you are transferring assets between blockchains. So how can you try and sort of unpick the how you're dealing with these, what I would see obvious sort of complexity security issues that must arise somewhere, because
no, for sure. I mean, I think yes, I think bridges have been they have been sort of the Achilles heel, I think, of Web3 in general, and just because of the way that they work, right? Is typically bridges are more, I think of bridges typically more as like sort of used in DeFi protocols than I would say in games. But yes, the basic idea is that in a DeFi protocol, if I have, say, Ethereum I have the ETH token on Ethereum, and I want to stake it into like an LP pool on Binance, right? So now essentially what happens is, like, I'm putting these tokens, I'm essentially locking them into a smart contract on Ethereum, which is the Ethereum side of the bridge. Then I'm minting these like wrap tokens on the other side. And the problem is that locked pool of ETH on the Ethereum side, that becomes like a honeypot, right? Because there's like just a massive pooled amount of tokens that are sitting there. If you manage to find a flaw in the bridging contract, well, like now you very quickly can drain them out. And so and also these bridges, because they do sort of interact they bridge sort of between two distinct technology stacks. There's just like a higher level of complexity as a result, more chance of bugs, and so like higher, at least easier to find bugs, right? So like a lot of the really big hacks over the last 2 to 3 years have been at these bridging levels. I would say for gaming, I think the thing we're more pushing is sort of like what we call like GMP, or general message passing, where rather than pushing tokens around, what you're actually sending is like smart contract messages, right? So there is no like locked, there's nothing that gets locked. Like essentially, in traditional technology, this would be similar to like a messaging bus or like a messaging queue or something along the lines, where you have a chain on one side sending instructions to another chain, and they have some way of like validating those instructions and then executing them. And then within Polkadot, there is outside Polkadot, from Moonbeam to the outside world, we're using Layer 0, we're using Wormhole, we're using Axelar for this type of things. Inside Polkadot, you have XEM, and then within, so XEM is kind of the same underlying concept, essentially a message passing protocol. But the difference is that the messages themselves are getting validated by the underlying Polkadot relay chain, which adds an extra layer of security. Like you now need to also like kind of just breach overall like Polkadot security. So I think, is the risk, does it completely evaporate? No, there's no such thing as like no risk, right? Every piece of code eventually, can have a bug and so forth. But it does, I think, sort of make it removes sort of this like large honeypot of tokens that people. It just removes kind of a little bit of the incentive, and then I think it's just extra layers of security, which obviously make it harder to kind of exploit, basically. So I don't know if I've answered your question properly. That's kind of what comes to mind, basically.
Because basically the security is around messaging, and obviously someone could hack the messaging system or send bad messages, but even at that stage, you're not actually the value of itself is not. It's not just sitting there in a.
We have some additional ideas on. I mean, there's sort of things. We have some partnerships we're working on that I can't sort of disclose yet, but I think we have some other ideas on like how to kind of I think it's funny. Like my grandfather was a guy that was like pretty obsessed with security, and he was the guy that had like 5 locks on his door. He was like, well, if they really want to get in, they're gonna get in. They're gonna bulldoze your door down. But the reality is that the average burglar doesn't want to deal with 5 locks. They're gonna go to the neighbors. And I think so. There are things that you can do where you just make it harder and harder, right? And sort of remove the incentive. And so there are some additional things we're working on to improve that. So
okay, cool. Just to show I've done my research, I just want to quickly talk. Well, I'll offer it out to you. You can see if there's anything interesting to say there. So Moonbeam is the L1, and then you have Moonriver? That's right, which is the. Well, you can explain it. So there's Polkadot, and then Polkadot has this. They call it is it like a canary chain or
Kusama,
a test chain called Kusama.
And
I remember back in the day, probably a few years ago, people were talking about Kusama as being something that was more appropriate for gaming, because the parachains on Polkadot have these very expensive to run. They're these sort of quite high level sort of chains. So back in there, I remember people talking about Kusama as something that people might want to run games on. I'm not really seeing anything of that. Is that Kusama now just very much seen as like just a test net now, rather than something you actually run production on?
I think the idea behind Kusama was that like yes, it is sort of a canary network, right? So it's not really a test network, because when I think of a test network, I'm sort of thinking of like just like a purely internal system that only engineering works. So Kusama is a public chain, and so is Moonriver, which is basically Moonbeam's sister chain. So it's a public chain. I mean, it has its own tokens. There are applications that are deployed in Moonriver or on Kusama that are not deployed on like Moonbeam or on Polkadot. And so the reason it's called a canary chain is because you're not just testing code, you're also testing tokenomics, right? So when you have things with financial impact, so for example, if we were to change some core aspect of our tokenomics, we would try that first in Moonriver and see kind of how that plays out before putting it into Moonbeam. I think the idea, at least the way that I understand it, it was a little bit before my time, but I think the idea that I understand is because it's a canary network, so like things are a little bit looser there. Updates, at least at the Kusama philosophy, updates get done there more frequently. For gaming, because you don't like a DeFi protocol, you're not as worried about like significant loss of assets. You might want that like faster cycle of development, and so I think that's a little bit where that thinking came from. I think today, I mean, realistically, most teams are deploying just on Polkadot. I also think it's just like Kusama launched before Polkadot and also Moonriver launched before Moonbeam, so I think there was sort
Okay.
of a lot of interest because it was the first change that launched. But
Yeah.
now that these sort of big daddy chains are there, I think that's where we're sort of seeing most of the activity basically.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. So I guess we'll kind of finish off with gaming. So how what kind of stuff are you seeing? You're seeing sort of some inbound from current systems. Actually, can you talk a bit about the Amino thing as well? Because you just
Animo,
mentioned
yeah.
that in process. Animo,
Yeah,
sorry,
so we're pretty excited about that. Basically, I mean, I think we've kind of been working on this partnership since the fall last year. I mean, obviously
okay.
they were still going through their development cycles, and we didn't want to. It's sort of
Yeah.
a thing we've wanted to talk about for a long time, and we couldn't because they weren't ready, right? So they wanted to kind of finish their development cycle and get closer to launch. But I'm pretty excited about it because I do think there is like a significant future for Web3 in gaming, and we could double click on that because I know there tends to be a little bit of controversy about that. But I think a big part of this is just about reducing friction, right? Like a lot of games still in Web3 today, they're very difficult to get into. Like it's you really need to understand what blockchain is. You need to have a wallet. You need to go get tokens for gas. You need to potentially go buy NFTs on the NFT marketplace. I'd say a lot of teams that are building in Web3 are, I think they have a lot of great ideas, but they're also somewhat early or immature from a development practice and a business practice point of view. So they haven't quite figured out how to remove a lot of this user friction. And so we're very excited about Animo because I think we're kind of looking at this as like kind of the model that you'll see a lot of teams do, where it's first of all, it's a game first. It's not unlike with Axis Infinity, where essentially it's GameFi, it's DeFi with like a thin gaming veneer. The game itself is not that fun. It's grindy. You're doing it to make money. Animo is primarily game first. You play because you want to play because it's fun. It has high production value. It's accessible via these like main delivery mechanisms that gamers are used to, which is Steam, the Epic Store, PlayStation, Nintendo. And then in terms of the Web3 concepts, like you don't get smacked in the face with them right off the bat. You can sort of you can start playing the game without buying any NFTs or any digital collectibles, and then as you get comfortable with it, the more that you get interested in it or get interested in tradability, then you have the option to sort of take ownership of the digital assets and start trading it and so forth. And I just think that's a way easier path for like mainstream people to kind of get into Web3 is right is to kind of just generally ease into that as opposed to as opposed to sort of smacking people in the face with it, basically. I mean, so so we're pretty excited about it. I think we're excited about the partnership, and I think we're getting a lot of press around it, and so that then also like helps us then like attract more games, right? Because like there is a little bit of this thing of like people want to know, we're like, well, you're saying you're a gaming chain, okay, but like what games do you have? Well, you need something to show, basically. So
no, exactly.
excited about that. So
cold start problem. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And for, if people are interested, where should they be? What should they be doing to find out more about sort of what you guys offer and
from a Moonbeam perspective, like I mean, Moonbeam, I think you go to our website. We have I think we have pretty extensive documentation if you're a developer. I think there's pretty extensive documentation. We have like this sort of Moonbeam DApp that has all of the different applications, not just gaming, but also DeFi and others that are on the ecosystems. I think there's close to 300 now, so people can go sort of see what piques their interest. And then Animo itself is like I mean it's just available on Steam. You can download the. I think the original the full official launch I think is next month, but I think there's like a beta version that you can play right now. So
good, brilliant, cool, excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time and your explanations there.
Yeah, no, happy. No, thanks for having me, John. It was great to be here. So
good, and thanks to you for watching, listening, however you are consuming the podcast. Every week we are talking to people who are building out this whole new way of playing games and designing games and monetizing games and all this sort of stuff. Fascinating. So please do subscribe. Every week we are having new episodes now. So far this year I've done one every week, so that's pretty good. And I've got 2 podcasts to do next week, so we're definitely going to have done the first 2 months of the year doing it weekly. So make sure you're not missing out. Subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.